Story number 1. Shadows in the halls. I've worked a lot of strange jobs in my life: pizza delivery, short order cook, night clerk at a rundown motel, but nothing compared to the creeping dread I felt when I took the graveyard shift as a security guard at Waverly Hills Sanatorium. If you haven't heard of it, Waverly Hills sits on the outskirts of Louisville, Kentucky, and used to be a massive tuberculosis hospital in the early 1900s. Thousands of patients died within its walls, back when TB had no cure and the only treatment was fresh air, sunlight, and a lot of wishful thinking. Over the years, Waverly Hills gained a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in America. People claim to see apparitions in the old corridors, hear footsteps echoing in empty rooms, catch fleeting shadows at the edge of their vision. Of course, I'd always shrugged those stories off as bunk, just tall tales to drum up tourism. At least I did until I actually started working there. I was hired by a private security firm that maintains the building's perimeter, mostly to keep out thrill seekers and vandals. The current owners had partial renovations going on, with big dreams of turning the place into a hotel or museum eventually. In the meantime, the structure is old, full of odd corners and hidden passages. It's easy to get lost or hurt. Officially, my job was to deter trespassers from sneaking in at night. Unofficially, I was alone in that vast, crumbling structure from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., making sure no idiots broke in and got themselves killed exploring the haunted hospital. I never believed in the ghosts, that is, not until last winter. It was a bitterly cold December night, the kind of cold that seeps through your jacket and gnaws at your bones. I pulled into the small parking lot around 9:45 p.m. The wind howled across the lawn, turning the bare tree limbs into skeletal arms that scratched at the sky. Waverly Hills towered ahead of me, 5 stories of imposing brick, countless windows dark like sightless eyes. My headlights swept over the front entrance, revealing boarded-up doors and graffiti-scarred walls. The owners were focusing on the main interior floors for renovation, but the outside was still a patchwork of broken windows and old paint. I grabbed my flashlight and lunch thermos, then headed inside through a side door that was supposed to be secure. The place smelled of mold and old plaster. My footsteps echoed unnaturally. It's a massive structure, with wings branching off like arms to either side. During the day, it's merely old and neglected. At night, it feels alive, the darkness pooled in corners as though waiting to swallow you. After clocking in at the small security desk set up in what used to be the main lobby, I started the routine, checking cameras, scanning corridors, verifying all external doors were locked. Everything looked normal at first, just the usual flicker of overhead fluorescence that never seemed to fully come to life. The winter wind moaned against the boarded windows, making them rattle. There's a chill in Waverly's halls even during summer, but in mid-December, it was like stepping into a tomb. By 11:30 p.m., I'd done a round on the ground floor. The cameras installed at strategic spots were glitchy at best, but I could still see most main corridors. My phone signal was practically non-existent, the thick brick walls blocked it. If I needed to call for backup, I'd have to find a sweet spot near certain windows or rely on the dusty old landline at the security desk. So far, though, the place was still as a grave. Midnight came, and that's when the building's power started acting up. The overhead lights sputtered, flickered, and occasionally went out for a minute before returning. The owners had told me the electrical system was archaic and prone to short-circuiting in cold, wet weather. So I wasn't totally surprised. But it put me on edge, especially because each time the lights blinked, the gloom seemed to swirl in ways that teased my peripheral vision. As if something was moving out there in the corridor, just beyond the beam of my flashlight. I decided to do a walkthrough of each floor to see if a breaker had tripped or if there was a visible short somewhere. Waverly Hills has multiple floors, 5 above ground, plus a basement that extends under part of the structure. According to the night shift instructions, I was mainly supposed to stick to floors 1 through 4, because floor 5 was mostly sealed off for safety reasons. The basement was also out of bounds, except for one corridor that led to the old boiler room. Frankly, I was fine leaving the basement alone. Rumor had it that's where the staff once performed questionable experiments on advanced TB patients. If half the stories were true, it was the last place I wanted to be in the middle of the night. Still, a job's a job. So I radioed my minimal backup, really just letting the main dispatch know I was checking the floors, and headed up the central staircase to the second level. My footsteps rang hollow. The walls had once been painted in cheerful pastel, but time had peeled them back to reveal patches of plaster. The chill wind whistled in from cracks in the windows. My breath hung in the air. When I reached the top of the staircase, a wave of unease washed over me. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with patient rooms on either side. Each doorless entrance gaped like a mouth. The fluorescent fixture overhead buzzed and flickered. I told myself to calm down, this was just an old building. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. About halfway down the hallway, the lights blinked out again, plunging me into near darkness. My flashlight cut a weak swath of illumination. For a brief second, I thought I saw a figure at the far end of the corridor, pale and unmoving. The flashlight beam trembled as I pointed it, but the figure was gone. My heart hammered in my chest. I took a few careful steps forward, shining the light from room to room. Nothing but peeling wallpaper, old bed frames, scattered debris. Get a grip, I told myself. The eyes play tricks in low light. Could have been a shadow or a reflection. In any case, no sign of intruders. I forced myself to keep going, scanning for any visible electrical issues. Nothing jumped out, no exposed wires, no obvious water leaks. I made a mental note to check the fuse boxes later. I was about to leave the second floor when a static crackle came through on my walkie-talkie. It was faint, but I caught a snippet that sounded like footsteps near the nurse's station. Someone there? The voice was distorted. I recognized it as the day shift guard, Bill, who sometimes left me short messages if he was in the area. But Bill wasn't supposed to be here. And the nurse's station was on the third floor. Bill? Is that you? I asked into the radio. Silence. Then more static, then nothing. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead. Possibly just leftover chatter from an earlier time. But I'd never heard static recordings loop on these walkies. They're pretty basic, no fancy digital storage. So either Bill was messing with me or I was picking up some stray signal. I decided I had to check the third floor next. My entire body felt tense, as if the building had awakened and was paying attention. The third floor's corridor was nearly identical to the second's, long, lined with ghostly patient rooms. The nurse's station was a cluster of counters and cabinets, paint flaking. A few old wheelchairs and metal carts lay pushed against the walls. My flashlight revealed the usual clutter and dust. Then I noticed something out of place, wet footprints on the floor, leading from the station toward the far end of the hall. They were faint, but definitely footprints, as if someone had walked across a puddle and tracked water. Except the corridor was bone dry, and it hadn't rained or snowed inside, obviously. The footprints looked fresh, the edges not yet dried. My stomach twisted. They were human-sized, but only partial impressions, barefoot, from the looks of it. Why would anyone walk barefoot in a freezing building? I followed them, each step tinged with dread. They stopped abruptly outside a room with a broken door. The door's paint was peeled so badly it looked like rotting bark. I shone my flashlight inside. Nothing but an overturned bed frame, a battered nightstand. The footprints ended at the threshold, disappearing as if the person had vanished. No side exits, no windows. Just blank walls. My skin crawled. A low hum from my radio made me jump. Heart pounding, I answered, "Hello? Anyone there?" No words, just faint static. Then the line went dead. I hurried back down to the ground floor security desk, hoping to get a better sense of what was going on via the camera feeds. The old monitors displayed grainy black and white images of each floor's main hallway, plus the front entrance and a few external angles. At first glance, everything was still. Then, on the feed for the second floor corridor, something flickered, a shadow drifting across the left side of the screen. I leaned closer, brow furrowed. The shadow moved with a slow, deliberate pace, as if a person was walking. But there was no shape, just a shifting darkness that headed toward the stairwell. My mouth went dry. Could be a glitch, I muttered, trying to calm myself. But my instincts screamed otherwise. The second floor camera then blinked, and for half a second, I saw an outline, a figure with unnaturally thin limbs, pressed close to the wall. The feed cut to static. When it returned a moment later, the corridor was empty. I switched cameras, scanning the third floor, the fourth floor. The feed to the basement was black and offline. We rarely used it. The ground floor camera showed the front door secure, no sign of forced entry. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that something was inside with me. Or maybe multiple things. Shadows that the cameras only half captured. The overhead lights flickered again, this time accompanied by a whirring noise from somewhere deep in the building. If it was a failing generator or a short circuit, it might need resetting. The main breaker panels were near the basement's old maintenance room. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I really didn't want to go into that basement, but my job left me no choice. Arming myself with a heavier flashlight and an emergency lantern, plus a flimsy radio that wasn't guaranteeing any help, I headed for the basement steps. The hallway leading to them was narrower, the air even colder. The stale odor of disinfectant and decay hung in the air, a relic of decades past. My boots crunched on debris, fallen plaster, bits of tile. Each echo made me jump. I reached the basement door, which had a sign reading maintenance, authorized personnel only. A thick chain once locked it, but it now hung broken. Strange. I pushed the door open. A wave of frigid air washed over me, carrying the smell of damp earth. The narrow stairs descended into darkness that felt deeper than any I'd experienced upstairs. My flashlight beam revealed concrete steps, metal handrails streaked with rust. Step by step, I descended. With each footfall, the temperature dropped further, until my breath formed clouds in front of me. The place felt like a crypt. Memories of rumors and whispered stories flickered in my mind, staff performing unapproved surgeries, experimental TB treatments, and patients rumored to have died in agony, their spirits forever trapped. I tried to remain logical. They were just stories. Right? At the bottom of the stairs, I found a corridor that branched left and right. The left supposedly led to the old boiler room and breaker panels. The right was a labyrinth of sealed storerooms and defunct tunnels, rumored to connect to the famous body chute used to discreetly remove deceased patients back in the day. The owners insisted it was blocked off. But tonight, I felt an unearthly draft coming from that direction. Shivering, I turned left, focusing on my task. I wanted to reset the breakers, and then get the hell out. Halfway down, the overhead fluorescent flickered to life, throwing harsh white light over cracked tiles. I jumped as my reflection appeared in a mirror leaning against the wall, some leftover piece of equipment. My pulse hammered. I pressed forward, searching for the breaker boxes. The corridor ended at a metal door with chipped paint. Inside was a cluttered maintenance room with old tools, shelves of dusty filters, and a row of breaker panels. A sign overhead read high voltage. I exhaled, relieved to find something normal. Perhaps I'd fixed the breaker, the lights would stabilize, and the rest of my shift would pass in bored, paranoid peace. But as I stepped in, a noise caught my ear. A faint drip, drip, drip. Water? Or something else? I scanned the corners with my flashlight. The floor was dotted with old stains. The overhead bulb flickered, casting the shelves in jumping shadows. Over in the far corner, I saw a battered metal door propped open, leading into a space I didn't recognize, some subroom or lab area. That's not on any map I'd been given. Curiosity wrestled with fear. A beep from the breaker panel reminded me of my original purpose. I found the main switch that handled the upper floors. It was partially tripped. With a grunt, I reset it. The lights hummed, and the beep quieted. Good. So far, so good. Then that door in the corner squeaked as if nudged. I whipped around, flashlight dancing across it. Hello? No response. My heart rate spiked. Maybe a draft had moved it. I approached carefully, lantern raised. The door led into a smaller room lined with counters, sinks, and an examination table. Rusted metal trays scattered about. The overhead fixture was off. My flashlight revealed old medical charts pinned to a corkboard, black mildew creeping across them. A single steel cabinet sat in the corner, door ajar. The entire space smelled of musty decay and something like formaldehyde. I read the peeling label on the cabinet, experimental samples, property of doctor. The name had faded. My stomach clenched. This was a hidden lab, perhaps used for that rumored research. The rumor was that some staff had performed radical surgeries and experiments, hoping to cure TB or study its progression. Many patients were said to have died in these procedures. A sudden noise behind me, a tap on the floor. I turned, breath catching in my throat. The overhead light blinked once, throwing the space into stark relief. For a split second, I saw a figure standing in the far corner, draped in shadows, taller than any normal person. The face was lost in darkness, but I felt those eyes on me, unwavering. Then the bulb flickered out, plunging the lab into blackness. When my flashlight beam cut across the corner, the figure was gone. I scrambled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. My mind screamed, "Get out!" But as I turned, the door slammed shut, rattling the frame. I yanked on the handle, stuck. The sense of presence weighed on me, a suffocating hush filling the air. I hammered on the door, panic rising. "Hello?" My voice echoed. No one answered. Then something brushed against my arm, light as a cobweb. I jerked away, shining my flashlight in all directions. Nothing. My heart pounded so hard my ribs hurt. The door gave way suddenly. I spilled out into the maintenance room, gasping for air. The overhead bulb in the corridor blinked spastically, as if to mock me. I tore out of the maintenance room, ignoring the drip, drip behind me. As I entered the corridor, I realized a new light shone from the direction of the blocked tunnels. A faint, sickly glow. My mind begged me to ignore it, run upstairs, but I felt compelled. Maybe I'd find a clue, maybe a power surge. Adrenaline overcame caution. I crept toward the right corridor. A heavy odor filled my nostrils, earthy, rank, reminiscent of rotting cloth. The passage sloped downward, the walls narrowing. The overhead lamps had all died years ago, leaving me reliant on my flashlight. Something about the air felt heavier, as though the building's foundations pressed in. Finally, the corridor opened into a larger space, a rough, tunnel-like structure slanting further down. This, I realized, must be the infamous body chute, a sloped passage once used to transport the dead discreetly. The property owners claimed it was sealed, but here it was, partially open. My flashlight beam revealed old rails on the floor, possibly for gurneys. The darkness extended far beyond my light's reach. The same sickly glow pulsed from somewhere down the tunnel. My entire body shivered. I wanted to flee, but an awful fascination pulled me forward. I had to see. Step by step, the air grew colder, the stench stronger. My flashlight flickered, threatened to go out. The tunnel's walls were damp, condensation dripping. I realized the lumps on the floor might have been old cloth sacks, or something worse. I forced my gaze away. Then I saw it, a swirling presence, pale and luminescent, hovering near a bend in the chute. Not a solid figure, but a shifting mass of faint outlines. As if multiple silhouettes overlapped, writhing in slow motion. My breath caught. The Watchers, or the remnants of those who died here. They churned in silent agony, half-formed limbs reaching for the walls. A wave of horror washed over me. I heard a faint chorus of moans, like wind through 100 throats. I took a step back, hard hammering, but my foot slipped on wet ground. I fell, flashlight clattering away. My knee struck the rail, pain flaring white-hot. The swirling shapes seemed to coalesce at the sound, drifting closer. I scrambled on all fours, searching for my flashlight in the dark. There, a faint glimmer. I grabbed it and flicked it upward just in time to see one of the shapes lunge. Its face emerged from the swirling mass, sunken eyes, mouth locked in a silent scream. I shrieked, pushing myself backward. Then the shape dissipated like mist, leaving only the glimmer of the main mass. The moaning intensified, no longer faint. Every hair on my body stood on end. Mustering the last of my courage, I turned and ran, ignoring the pain in my knee. The Watchers gave a low wail, a lament that chased me back up the corridor until I found the basement hallway again. Sweat drenched my uniform. My throat felt raw from breathing the stale, frigid air. I limped up the steps to the main floor, half expecting the watchers to pull me back. Each door groaned as I flung it open. The building's upper floors were still quiet, as though the structure pretended innocence. But I wasn't fooled. I felt their presence behind every shadow. At the security desk, the monitors flickered wildly. The second-floor camera showed dark corridors, but occasionally a faint flash that might be a shape gliding across. The third-floor feed popped to static. The motion detector beeped once, registering movement in the main hallway. My heart lurched. Then it went silent. I tried calling my dispatch line on the landline phone. No dial tone. Just static. Great. The building had me pinned. I considered running outside, but the instructions said the perimeter gates lock from the outside after midnight. The owners didn't want random explorers wandering in. I had a key, but I'd left it in my car. My car was parked out front. So that was my next goal: get out, get to the car, and drive away. I no longer cared about the shift or the pay. I dashed for the side door I'd used to enter. It stood partially open, letting in a swirl of icy wind. Relief soared, maybe I'd just run out. But as I reached the threshold, the door slammed shut with such force it rattled my teeth. I yanked the handle. Jammed. Something or someone was holding it from outside. A strangled laugh escaped my throat. They didn't want me leaving. I tried the main entrance. Boarded up. The plywood had been hammered from the outside for the renovations, leaving no simple exit. My heart hammered. A new banging noise erupted from above, like heavy footfalls racing across the ceiling. The watchers were on the move. Or maybe it was something else. Doors started slamming from the upper floors, reverberating down the stairwell. Desperate, I recalled a fire escape leading from the fourth floor. If it wasn't locked, maybe I could climb down. Summoning courage, I took the stairs 2 at a time. The echoes of slamming doors chased me. On the second floor, a door slammed right as I passed. I glimpsed a figure in the corridor, a nurse's uniform, the old-timey white dress. She lifted a hand in a beckoning gesture, her face obscured by shadow. I bolted upward, refusing to look twice. By the time I reached the fourth floor, my lungs burned. The corridor was silent. No flickering overhead lights here, just darkness. My flashlight revealed a sign: fire escape this way. I hurried along, ignoring the battered hospital rooms. Then the beam caught a grotesque sight: a wheelchair standing in the middle of the hallway, slowly rolling back and forth as if nudged by an invisible hand. My throat tightened. Past it lay the door to the fire escape. I forced myself forward. Just a wheelchair, I told myself. Then the wheel screeched, spinning faster. The chair lurched, as though shoved, rolling across the floor to block my path. Something hissed in the gloom. I sidestepped the wheelchair and reached the fire escape door, tugging on the handle. Locked. Cursing, I fumbled with my ring of keys. A heavy scraping sound came from behind me. The wheelchair slid closer, guided by an unseen force. My hand shook so badly I dropped the keys. They jingled on the floor. I stooped to pick them up, my breath ragged. The scraping came again, closer. The watchers, or maybe just one of them, closing in. I jammed a random key into the lock, twisted. Nothing. Another key. Also no. My tears welled up. A third. Click. The knob gave, and I flung the door open, stepping onto the narrow metal landing of the fire escape. A gust of icy wind nearly knocked me over. The structure creaked under my weight. I slammed the door behind me, bracing it with my back. Through the tiny window, I saw the wheelchair crash into the door, propelled by an unseen force. The entire escape rattled, but it held. With a sob of relief, I turned to face the outside. The fire escape steps led down 3 stories to the courtyard, coated in a thin layer of frozen sleet. Pain shot through my injured knee, but I forced myself down rung by rung, ignoring the moans from inside. By the time I reached the bottom, my legs shook so violently I almost collapsed. I stumbled across the snow-dusted courtyard, heart pounding, searching for the main parking lot. A single security light flickered near the chain-link fence. Beyond it sat my car. The gate stood locked, but I had a second ring of keys in my glove box. If I could just get inside my car, maybe I could ram the gate or call for help. The watchers, if they were watchers, must have let me go. Or perhaps the building was satisfied with scaring me. I didn't question it. I yanked open my car door, flung myself inside, and stabbed the ignition with shaking hands. The engine roared to life. Relief soared, tears streaming down my face. I fumbled for the gate key in my glove box. The same ring from earlier? Praise God, it was still there. I sped toward the chain-link fence. My headlights washed across the old sign, Waverly Hills, no trespassing. Jamming the gate key into the padlock, I tore it off, flung the gate open. The wind whipped my hair. I hopped back in the car, heart in my throat, peeled out of that lot. In the rearview mirror, I saw the building looming in the darkness, a silhouette crowned with broken windows. And for a heartbeat, a single silhouette stood on the rooftop parapet, thin arms raised. Then it vanished as I sped away. I resigned the next day, no regrets. The security firm offered me double pay to continue. I told them to go to hell. Waverly Hills might be on the cusp of some tourist-friendly conversion, but I wasn't going to die or lose my mind just for a paycheck. In the weeks that followed, I had nightmares of long corridors, flickering lights, and looming shapes that whispered nonsense. Eventually, the dreams faded, but the memory never truly left me. I still don't know what I saw that night, whether it was the manifestation of thousands of restless souls, or the echo of something darker that thrived on the building's despair. Some folks say Waverly Hills is just an old, spooky building with no real ghosts. Let them think that if it comforts them. All I know is that I felt a presence beyond the rational. Something that awakened in those halls, feeding on isolation and fear. If you ever decide to take a ghost tour at Waverly Hills, or if the planned renovations turn it into a hotel, do yourself a favor. Keep your eyes forward, don't wander off, and never, ever stay after dark. Because once the sun sets, the watchers come out. They slip through the halls, rummaging for lost souls or a guard who made the mistake of shining his flashlight into their domain. And trust me, the building remembers. It waits, patient as the grave. In the hush of winter nights, you can still hear the faint squeak of a wheelchair rolling across the fourth-floor corridor, footsteps in empty wards, and whispers beckoning from the basement. Pray you never have to follow them. Once Waverly Hills wants you, it doesn't let go. I learned that lesson in one harrowing shift. I escaped, but every time a light flickers or a door creaks at home, my heart leaps, half expecting the watchers to be there. Because Waverly Hills changed me. And maybe that's the scariest truth. Sometimes we leave a haunting place, but it never quite leaves us. The shadows remain, etched on our souls, forever haunting the edges of our everyday life. If you dare walk those corridors one night, just remember, the watchers have seen more than any living person, and they do not rest. Especially not in that place. Especially not at night. Especially not if you're alone. Story number 2. The Winter Keeper's Curse. I remember the first time I laid eyes on Bodie, its abandoned saloons and weather-beaten cabins rising against a backdrop of barren hills, ghostly remnants of a once booming gold mining town. Most folks know it as a California State Historic Park, a ghost town preserved in a state of arrested decay. But I discovered soon enough that arrested decay meant more than just peeling paint and creaking doors. Something lingered here, restless beneath the dust and ice. I was hired as a seasonal caretaker, someone to watch over the site's old warehouse during the long, brutal winter nights when temperatures could plummet below freezing, and the howling wind battered the wooden walls like an angry spirit. At first, it sounded like a dream job, solitary, sure, but I never minded being alone. I liked the quiet. Besides, the job paid decently, and my boss, a park ranger named Dennis, assured me it was straightforward: check the security system, patrol the interior of the warehouse, keep an eye out for trespassers. Just be mindful, Dennis had said in an odd tone, that some folks claim Bodie's under a curse. They say anyone who steals an artifact or disturbs the ghosts is doomed to misfortune. I'd laughed that off, but his eyes didn't shine with humor. I arrived in late November, just as the last wave of tourists scattered. The snows came early that year, dusting the weathered rooftops and cracked boardwalks in fine powder. My assignment was the big structure that used to store mining equipment and supplies, what we all called the Bodie Warehouse. Despite the park's regulations and attempts at preservation, local thrill seekers sometimes tried to sneak in after dark, hunting for souvenirs or adrenaline. Hence, the caretaker job, complete with a so-called modern security system installed in the old building. The warehouse perched at the edge of the ghost town, overshadowed by a line of ragged hills. Inside, stacked crates labeled from the 1800s, old mining carts, rusted tools, and dusty ledgers lay in carefully arranged rows. It was a museum in limbo, half-forgotten relics waiting for some future exhibit. The place smelled of cold metal and ancient timbers. By day, I'd walk its aisles, checking for leaks or damage, ensuring the heat lamps were set to keep the artifacts from freezing. By night, I'd hole up in the small office they'd converted into a security station, complete with cameras covering most of the interior. The system wasn't perfect, grainy feeds, occasional static, but better than nothing. I settled into a routine. During the day, Bodie stood eerily silent, the wind moaning through empty doorways and rattling the old saloon signs. At night, the temperature dropped further, sometimes enough to frost the windows of the office from the inside. The howls of wind battered the walls, and I learned to tune out the droning hum of the overhead fluorescent light. I'd sip coffee from a thermos, watch the flickering camera feeds, and read old paperbacks to pass the time. But on the first truly cold night, something changed. I was at my desk, around midnight, nibbling on a stale energy bar, when an alarm beeped. The warehouse's motion sensors had triggered. My heart jumped. Normally, it was either a rodent or some glitch. Still, I scanned the camera monitors, flipping through angles, row upon row of crates, dusty walkways, steel shelves. Nothing seemed out of place. A few minutes later, the alarm reset, indicating no further motion detected. I chalked it up to a stray cat or a jittery sensor and tried to ignore the tension creeping up my spine. Then it happened again, an hour later. This time, a repeated beep, 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 more insistent. I switched the monitor feed. One camera in the far corner flickered. It showed what looked like a crate partially shifted out of line, as if someone had yanked it away from the wall. My pulse quickened. "Hello?" I muttered out loud, half laughing at myself for addressing a camera feed. But the crate remained still. No figure, no footprints, just that crate in a new position. I sighed, grabbed my flashlight, and slid on my parka. The whistling wind outside hammered the old walls. As I stepped into the main warehouse area, the cold bit my cheeks. My breath clouded the air. Rows of shelving cast long shadows under the overhead security lights. It was a labyrinth of silent, half-forgotten history. The hush felt alive, pressing in on my ears. The floor creaked beneath my boots. I found the aisle in question. Sure enough, a heavy wooden crate labeled Hardware, 1881 had been moved almost a foot away from the wall. It would have taken a strong person to shift it. I leaned in, inspecting footprints. The dust was thick, but I didn't see any fresh shoe prints. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. I nudged the crate back into place, my heart pounding like I was guilty of disturbing something. A sudden clang from deeper in the warehouse made me jump. I whipped around, flashlight beam dancing across a row of antique mining equipment. Just the wind? Or maybe something toppling? "Hello?" I called, voice echoing. No answer. My mouth felt dry. Carefully, I crept deeper between tall shelves laden with corroded pickaxes and/or carts. My flashlight caught swirling dust motes. The only sound was the thud of my pulse in my ears. I found nothing out of place beyond that single crate. Still uneasy, I returned to the office. The cameras showed empty aisles, crates lined up neat as tombstones. I exhaled, sank into the old chair, and tried to calm myself. Then, in the top left monitor, I caught something, a flicker of movement. It vanished before I could focus. For the next hour, I stayed glued to the screens, eyes straining, but saw nothing else. By dawn, I convinced myself it was stress, or maybe a rodent knocking things over. Happens in old buildings, right? But the next night, the alarm sounded again, twice, then 3 times. Each time, I found something different moved, a shelf of old ledgers partially pulled out, an antique wheelbarrow rolled 5 feet from its usual spot. No footprints. No sign of forced entry. And always the same fleeting flicker on camera, like a shape half caught, then gone. I began double-checking the warehouse's old doors each evening, verifying the padlocks. Nothing was tampered with. A creeping paranoia took hold of me. I started hearing faint knocking in the rafters or a drag across the floor somewhere behind me. Whenever I checked, I found nothing. The cameras would give me glimpses, a dim silhouette shifting at the corner of an aisle, or a reflection in a glass display case. Once I thought I saw a face, pale and hollow-eyed, staring right at the lens. By the time I blinked, it was gone. Trying to keep sane, I called Dennis, my boss, and described the odd occurrences. He sounded concerned but not shocked. The building's old, he reasoned. Probably the wind, or animals. Could be ice expansions in the wood causing weird noises. Just keep an eye out. If you see any real evidence of trespassers, let me know immediately. I almost pressed him about the rumored Bodhi curse, but stopped, not wanting to sound superstitious. I told myself, you're a grown man. Don't let ghost stories get in your head. So I stayed on duty. Then came the cold snap that froze the windows entirely. I arrived at the warehouse for my usual shift, found thick frost creeping over the glass in the office. Even with the space heater blasting, my breath puffed white. The security monitors flickered more than usual, probably from the temperature messing with the wiring. The outside wind roared like an animal, rattling every loose plank. It was shaping up to be a long, miserable night. A little before midnight, the alarms beeped again. This time, every single motion sensor in the main aisle triggered in rapid succession. My blood turned to ice. That implied something, or someone, had traveled the entire length of the warehouse, setting off each sensor in turn. Could a single person even move that fast? I switched the main camera feed. The lights flickered, showing a long shot of the aisle. Nothing. Then something drifted across the feed, like a faint silhouette made of smoke, passing from left to right. My stomach lurched. I blinked, rewound the feed, but it was gone. The sensor readings died. The warehouse looked empty again. Summoning courage, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the office. The old timbers groaned under a gust of wind. My heart hammered. Anyone here? I shouted into the gloom. My voice echoed, and the building responded with an uncanny hush. I moved aisle by aisle, shining my light over crates, dusty furniture, old signs from Bodhi's Gold Rush heyday. No intruder. No footprints in the dust. But an oppressive cold radiated from the walls, more intense than even the outside temperature, as if the building itself exhaled ice. I was about to give up and return to the office when I noticed a path of disturbance in the dust, leading behind a row of ancient mining tools. It wasn't footprints exactly, more like a trail, as though something had slid across the floor. My flashlight followed it to a corner where an old mirror stood propped, a leftover from some Bodhi hotel lobby. My reflection flickered in the tarnished glass. Then behind me, I glimpsed a shape, dark, featureless. I spun around, flashlight stabbing the darkness, but there was only emptiness. The fine hair on my arms rose. Something was there. Something that wanted me to know I wasn't alone. Back in the office, I poured coffee from my thermos with shaking hands. The monitors glowed, capturing angles of shadowy aisles. I began to dread these screens. Too often, they teased me with half-seen shapes, flickers that turned my stomach. The antique radiator in the corner clanged, providing little warmth. Outside, the wind battered the building. Then, in the top right monitor, I saw movement. A figure stood near the warehouse's side door, a single, static shape. It wore what looked like old-fashioned clothing, ragged and dusty. The head angled forward, as if listening. My pulse jackhammered. "Hello?" I whispered, as though it could hear me. Slowly, the figure turned to face the camera. I couldn't see its face clearly, just a pale blur. My mouth went dry. Then it vanished, as if stepping out of frame. Every nerve in me shrieked. I had to check the side door. If it was an intruder, They were violating state park rules, possibly damaging historical property. If it was a ghost, well, I couldn't keep ignoring it. Gritting my teeth, I took my flashlight and braced myself for the next confrontation. The side door area was eerily silent. I found the door locked from the inside, exactly as I'd left it. No sign of forced entry. But the corridor leading away was dark, the overhead bulb flickering. The moment I stepped into that corridor, a cold gust blasted my face, impossibly strong for an indoor draft. It carried a faint whisper that sent chills down my spine. I could have sworn it said my name. Kai, it moaned, the syllables scraping like dead leaves. That was my name, the one almost nobody in Bodhi used. Terror coiled in my gut. I raised the flashlight, but the corridor was empty. "Who's there?" I demanded, voice trembling. No answer. Just the wind, rising again like a lament. I retreated, heart pounding, stepping carefully backward until I reached the main aisle. My breath came ragged and quick. This was no ordinary trespasser. If it was a spirit, it knew me, calling my name. The idea unsettled me to the core. The rest of the night was a haze. I forced myself to remain in the office, eyes glued to the screens. The alarm triggered sporadically. Each time, a different aisle. Each time, I glimpsed that figure for a split second, creeping closer to the camera. By 5 a.m., I was a sweaty, trembling mess. I waited for the faint light of dawn, counting minutes, desperate to escape outside. When the rising sun finally glowed through the frosted windows, I locked up the warehouse and fled to my old pickup truck. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice. Only once I hit the main road did I breathe in relief, determined to quit that same day. But when I got home, I found an envelope slid under my apartment door. It was from Dennis. Inside was a note, "Need you to hold on. No one else can cover Bodhi this week. Thank you for your dedication." The check enclosed was more generous than usual. A wave of exhaustion and guilt washed over me. Money was tight, I couldn't afford to walk away. I told myself maybe I was overreacting. One more week, I bargained. Then I'd walk away for good. 2 nights later, the real terror began. It was colder than ever, the windows coated in a thick layer of frost so opaque I couldn't see outside. The warehouse heater groaned, struggling to keep up. My parka felt inadequate. By 11 p.m., I was pacing the office, trying to stay warm, sipping coffee that barely helped. The wind's howling reached a fever pitch, rattling the building's rafters. My reflection in the window revealed haunted eyes, shadows under them from lack of sleep. The alarm triggered again, but this time it didn't just beep a few times, it blared incessantly, every sensor lighting up as though the entire warehouse was in motion. Adrenaline seized me. On the monitors, I saw crates shifting, items toppling. One aisle camera captured a shelf tipping over, scattering metal tools. But the bigger horror was the figure, not just one but multiple silhouettes drifting among the crates, each barely visible, like flickers of ancient miners or townsfolk from a century ago. They glided forward, pausing to stare at the camera, hollow faces tinted by static. My blood ran cold. I dashed into the main room to see for myself, shining my flashlight down the aisles. Instantly, I saw scattered tools, a fallen shelf. The alarm lights flashed red, painting the gloom in eerie pulses. "Stop!" I yelled, feeling stupid but desperate. The only answer was the clatter of something metallic falling further down. I sprinted that way, stumbling over debris. At the aisle's end, I found a broken crate, its contents spilled across the floor, old tin plates, a tarnished lamp. No intruder in sight. But a single watery footprint glimmered in the flickering red light, just one, leading nowhere. Suddenly, the building's overhead lamps died completely, plunging me into darkness illuminated only by the alarm strobe. My flashlight flickered, the battery draining. Terror clamped my throat. I realized I might be surrounded by them. The Watchers. Or ghosts. Or whatever haunted Bodhi's warehouse. "Kai," a voice rasped behind me, barely audible over the wind's roar. I spun, flashlight aimed. Nothing but swirling dust. My heart hammered. The voice came again, from the opposite side. Kai, drawn out, mocking. The metal shelves vibrated under some unseen force, tools rattling. Then a crate slid across the floor, directly in my path, as though blocking my escape. I fumbled to climb over it, panting in fear. The alarm strobes cast wild shadows. My foot snagged on a coil of rope, sending me sprawling onto the cold concrete. Pain shot through my elbow. The light strobed again, revealing a shape looming above me, tall, ragged clothes, an old wide-brimmed hat. Empty eye sockets bored into mine. I screamed, scrambled backward. The shape flickered out, leaving the aisle empty. Coughing, tears in my eyes, I forced myself upright. My first thought, run back to the office, call for help. But the office was too far. The overhead lights stuttered to life for a moment, then died again, as if something was draining the entire building's power. The shrieking wind and alarm siren merged into a cacophony. I took a left turn down another aisle, heading for the main entrance. The door had to be my only chance to escape. Halfway there, I heard something dragging on the floor behind me, slow, deliberate drags. My flashlight beam wavered, catching glimpses of an inhuman silhouette. My panic spiked. I ducked around a corner, found a heavy side door, and yanked on its handle. Locked. I slammed my shoulder against it. No give. A cold presence slid up behind me, so I bolted again, sobbing, heading deeper into the warehouse labyrinth. After what felt like ages, I staggered into a back storeroom used for less important artifacts, boxes of old linens, battered furniture. The alarm was no longer audible here, drowned out by the wind outside. My breath came in ragged gasps. I sank against the wall, blinking sweat from my eyes. That's when the overhead lamp flickered on. A single bare bulb cast a dim glow over the clutter. The temperature felt sub-zero, though. My breath formed clouds. Then, with a slow squeal, the storeroom's far door inched open. By itself. A bitter wind hissed through the gap, carrying a rustling noise that almost sounded like voices whispering. I forced myself to stand, flashlight trembling in my grip. The voices grew louder, like an entire crowd whispering in unison. Stay, they said, or maybe Kai. It was hard to tell. My scalp prickled. The door banged fully open, revealing a corridor beyond, one I didn't recognize. More debris and stacked crates. But at the end, a swirl of gloom resolved into a figure. I couldn't see its face, only a tattered shape in old-time miner's garb. It lifted an arm slowly, pointing at me. Then it turned, gliding away. God help me, I followed. I don't know why. Some compulsion drew me down that corridor. My boots scuffed dust, my entire body numb with fear. Each step I took seemed to echo with the hush of a century's ghosts. The corridor opened into a half-collapsed side room. In the corner stood an old safe, door ajar, filled with random scraps of paper. A single window, frosted opaque, allowed the faint glow of the alarm strobes to seep in. In the middle of the room, I saw the figure again. My flashlight revealed it more clearly, the tall silhouette of a man with sunken cheeks, wearing a stained shirt and suspenders, old boots caked in dried mud. His eyes glowed with a pale, dead light. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. Yet I heard him in my mind, the words forming as if whispered directly into my brain, "You can't leave, Kai." My knees nearly buckled. That voice was impossibly old, laced with sorrow and anger. Stay. No, I managed to croak, tears streaking my face. I want out. He took a step forward, hand outstretched. I tried to back away, but my feet felt rooted. The air thickened, pressing on my chest. A swirl of images flashed in my head, miners toiling in Bodhi's gold rush, men dying of thirst or violence, bodies left in shallow graves, curses uttered over stolen gold. A wave of despair crushed me. This was the Bodhi curse, personified, a restless spirit tethered to ill-gotten treasure, raging at the living who dared to remain. My mind reeled. If I surrendered, would I become another lost soul in Bodhi's tally? The figure's silent voice urged me, stay. I screamed, mustering every ounce of will, tearing my gaze from his terrible eyes. In a surge of adrenaline, I bolted past him, ignoring the freezing wave that gripped my limbs. The moment I crossed that threshold, the corridor behind me erupted with crashing debris, as though invisible hands hurled crates and shelves in fury. I half expected something to seize me, but I managed to sprint back into the main warehouse. The overhead lights flickered, and the alarm siren resumed its manic shriek. Somehow, I found the main door. It was no longer locked. I twisted the handle, spilled out into the frigid Bodhi night. The wind blasted my face, stinging with ice shards. But I didn't care, I was out. I scrambled across the snow-dusted ground to my truck. The door was mercifully unlocked. I jumped in, fired the engine. It sputtered, then roared to life. My chest shook with sobs of relief. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed the warehouse, alarm lights strobing behind the frosted glass. A single figure stood in the doorway, watching, as if lamenting my escape. I gunned the engine, fishtailing on the icy path, and roared away from Bodhi, leaving the ghost town's dark silhouette behind me. The wind carried a final whisper across the deserted land, "Stay." But I was gone. My heart hammered so hard, I nearly lost control on the winding road. By sunrise, I reached the ranger station, disheveled, face tear-streaked, my mind numb with terror. Dennis found me there, half collapsed. I babbled about the moving crates, the footsteps, the voices. He paled, quietly listening, then patted my shoulder. He didn't mock me. "I've heard stories," he whispered, voice tight. "We usually don't talk about them. Some say the Bodhi curse is real." He sighed. "But you're alive. I'd say quit while you can." I did. I never went back to Bodhi. That night remains etched in my nightmares, the swirling shadows, the watchers lurking among old crates, a phantasmal miner commanding me to stay. To this day, I cannot handle wide-open, deserted places without scanning for flickering shapes. I hear the wind blow in certain ways, and my skin crawls, recalling that whispered voice uttering my name. Bodhi stands silent still, a relic of the gold rush, haunted by tragedies and curses older than our modern alarms. People visit in summer, snapping pictures of the deserted Main Street, the schoolhouse stuck in time, the leaning church. They find it quaintly spooky but safely distant. They don't know the true heart of Bodhi, what awakens in the dead of winter when no tourists roam. The spirits remain, bound to the rusted remnants of a dream turned nightmare. And if you ever dare walk Bodhi's streets in the cold season, you might sense them, too, lurking in the corners of an abandoned warehouse, waiting for the next caretaker to enter. They'll call your name on the wind, urging you to linger in that frozen wasteland, promising you a place among the restless dead. Take it from me, you'd be wise to ignore them. Turn around, leave Bodhi to its ghosts, and never look back. Because once Bodhi wants you, it does not let go. Story number 3. The Night Shift on Route 66. I've always felt a certain kind of romance tied to Route 66, a highway of half-forgotten motels and neon signs flickering in the desert night, a corridor for drifters and dreamers. That said, I never expected my own piece of that story to be a lonely gas station in northern Arizona, miles from the nearest town. It was an old place with cracked asphalt forecourt, a single row of flickering fluorescents, and a broken neon sign that once read open 24/7 in garish pink letters. Only half of them work now, so it just flashed O_N2/7. I took the night shift job mostly because it paid better than the alternatives and guaranteed solitude. I liked being alone, or at least I thought I did. But that was before winter storms settled in, turning the desert into an empty, freezing wasteland, and before the stranger came. It was the kind of cold that gnawed at your bones, the wind keening across the empty roads. We rarely had customers in winter, only the occasional trucker or a clueless tourist ignoring the route closures. My boss, Jerry, usually let me handle the shift solo. He had full confidence in our security cameras and the big steel lock on the door. "Who's going to rob us out here anyway?" he'd ask with a shrug. "Nobody's around for miles." That particular night started like any other. I'd arrived just before 10 p.m., flicked on the station's overhead lights, and set my thermos of coffee on the counter. The store was stocked with dusty candy bars, lukewarm soda in battered refrigerators, and a few greasy hot dogs rotating under a weak heat lamp. Our single-pump island was lit by a single flickering bulb that made it look like a stage set for a slasher movie. I was thumbing through a battered horror paperback, listening to the wind hiss against the windows, when I heard the rumble of an engine outside. My stomach tensed involuntarily. At that hour, visitors were rare. Peering out the glass door, I saw a pickup truck pull up, a battered gray shape with tinted windows. The engine idled for a moment. Then the door swung open, and a figure stepped out. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a heavy coat zipped up to his chin. Snow clung to the hem as though he'd driven through a blizzard. Odd, because we'd only had a dusting of snow earlier. He left the truck running, headlights cutting across the forecourt. Then, in a few long strides, he stepped into the glow of the station lights. I felt an inexplicable jolt of anxiety. Something about his posture, about the way he moved, too quick, too stiff, set my nerves on edge. But I forced myself to keep calm. I was alone, sure, but I could handle one guy, right? He pushed open the door. The wind swirled in behind him, making the overhead fluorescent buzz. The man's face was obscured by the brim of his hat, but I caught a glimpse of pale skin, eyes like dark hollow snow crystals speckled his coat. He stood there for a moment, as if uncertain what to do next. "Evening," I tried, my voice echoing in the empty store. He didn't speak. Instead, he let the door shut behind him with a hiss and walked to the far corner of the store, scanning the meager snack selection. The overhead lights flickered just then, making me jump. When they steadied, he was looking at me, two shadowy eyes under that hat. I swallowed. "Got coffee, if you want," I offered, forcing a polite tone. "Not the best, but it's hot." No reply. His silence weighed on me like a physical presence. And then I noticed something else. He was carrying a small canvas bag, clasped tight in his left hand. At first, I thought nothing of it. Lots of travelers carry duffels or rucksacks. But the fabric had a dark stain near the bottom, damp and glistening under the fluorescence. Blood. My stomach twisted. Could it be something else? Engine oil? But it looked too red, too thick. The man shuffled over to the counter, that bag swinging slightly at his side. I forced a smile, hoping to seem casual. "Anything you need, friend?" Without a word, he set the bag on the counter between us. I recoiled at the odor that wafted up, metallic, coppery. My heart hammered. "What is that?" I whispered, half hoping he'd say it was just paint or raw meat. He still said nothing, just stared at me from beneath the brim of his hat. Then, almost too fast to see, he spun on his heel and headed for the door. I gaped, breath caught in my throat. "Wait!" I called, but the door's bell jingled, and he was gone, disappearing into the swirling snow. A second later, the pickup engine revved, tires squealed. I rushed to the window, but the truck roared off, tail lights vanishing down the dark highway. Then I realized I was alone with that blood-soaked bag. Hands trembling, I reached for the phone behind the counter. Maybe I should call the police. But the nearest sheriff's office was half an hour away, and the lines out here sometimes died in storms. My mind raced. What if there was a body part in that bag? The thought made my stomach clench. Or maybe it was some twisted prank. I peered over the rim of the bag. The smell was nauseating. I caught a glimpse of something fleshy, red-stained cloth. That was enough. My nerves snapped. I lurched backward, nearly knocking over a display of stale candy bars. "Shit," I muttered, sweat beading my forehead. "Get a grip." I forced myself to dial 911. The phone rang. And rang. The line clicked, but all I heard was static. Figures. Our phone lines were notoriously unreliable in bad weather. The connection sputtered, then died. "No, no, no," I hissed, jiggling the receiver. Nothing but a dull tone. I set the phone down, shuddering. Then the lights flickered again, more violently this time. The overhead fixture buzzed, dimmed, and came back. At that same moment, I heard a shuffle from the store's rear, near the stockroom. A single thump. My pulse leapt. Could the stranger have circled back inside? I crept around the counter, flipping on the flashlight we kept for blackouts. "Hello?" No response. Another shuffle, from behind the stockroom door. That door led to a small space for extra oil cans, beverage crates, cleaning supplies. Nobody else was supposed to be in there. Could the bagman have snuck around back? Was he rummaging for something, or planning to ambush me? My mind conjured a dozen horrific possibilities. Adrenaline spiked. I grabbed a tire iron from beneath the counter, handshaking. If I had to defend myself, I would. Step by step, I approached the stockroom. The door was ajar, light from the main area spilling in. "Who's there?" I called, voice cracking. The only answer was a cold gust that blew through a gap in the storeroom's old vent. I nudged the door open with the tire iron, flashlight held high. The stockroom was a cramped rectangle lined with shelves. I saw no one. No footprints in the thin layer of dust. Confused, I stepped inside fully, letting my flashlight sweep across the boxes and crates. Nothing seemed disturbed. The shuffle I heard must have been from the wind knocking something over. My nerves rattled, I exhaled and turned to go back to the front. Then I froze. The bag, that bloody bag, was gone from the counter. My heart hammered. I'd left it right there in the open. Who could have taken it? In the silence, I heard a faint tapping from somewhere outside, or maybe on the roof. The wind? Or something else? Snatching my phone again, I tried the line. Still dead. I had no cell reception either. Our location was a cell dead zone. I was on my own. Panicked thoughts swirled. Could the stranger have slipped back in, taken the bag? If so, why? And what the hell was inside it? The memory of that metallic stench made my stomach churn. I decided I had to check outside. Maybe the man was still lurking. We had a small spotlight in the storage closet. I grabbed it, stepped onto the forecourt. The wind blasted me, carrying an icy sting that almost tore the breath from my lungs. The fluorescent lamp above the pump flickered, half drowning in swirling snow. The highway beyond was dark, no headlights in sight. I circled around the station, my spotlight cutting through the night. Tracks in the dust and gravel near the building side caught my eye, footprints, smeared with dark stains that could be blood. My throat constricted. They trailed away from the station, heading into the open desert. The footprints were large, spaced wide, as if the walker had an uneven stride. Without really thinking, I found myself following them a few yards, the wind tugging at my jacket. The prints led past a battered sign half buried in sand, reading Route 66 to 16 miles to next town. Then they vanished into the darkness beyond the station's glow. A voice in my head screamed, "Go back. This is insane." Yet I took another step. That's when I felt something behind me, an oppressive presence, a gaze boring into my back. I spun, heart pounding, shining the spotlight. The gas station's facade shimmered, fluorescent lamp humming. No one was there. But the sense of being watched didn't leave. I retreated, chest tight with fear, back through the station's door, bolting it shut behind me. After that, I retreated to the counter, numb with dread. I told myself I'd stay put, keep an eye on the exit. Wait until dawn, if I had to. The floor clock read 1:42 a.m., morning felt a lifetime away. The station lights flickered again, dangerously close to blacking out. I tried to occupy my mind by scanning the security system, an old screen with half a dozen camera feeds around the pumps and exterior corners. The resolution was terrible. But in the swirling snow on camera 3, I glimpsed movement, a figure approaching from the dark. Slowly, it neared the pump island. My mouth went dry. The shape was tall, wearing the same coat, same wide-brimmed hat. The same man who'd left the bag. The screen glitched, and for a moment, it looked like the figure's face was wrong. Distorted. Then the feed cleared, and he was just a silhouette again, pacing toward the glass door. I froze. My hand crept toward the tire iron on the floor behind the counter. The overhead lamp flickered wildly, as if about to die. The doorknob rattled. The wind battered the thin walls. He's back. The door swung open. The man stood there, letting swirling snow blow inside. "What do you want?" I managed to croak, voice barely audible over the wind. He took a step in, coat trailing, hat brim overshadowing his face. My gaze flicked to his hands. They were empty, no bag, no weapon that I could see. But something about his posture screamed danger. Then the overhead lights blinked off, plunging us into near darkness. My heart slammed in my chest. The only illumination came from the flicker of the failing neon sign outside, casting a pinkish hue that made him look ghost-like. When the lights returned, he was closer. I hadn't heard him move. A sickening smell filled my nostrils, like decaying flesh, sweet and putrid. The man's lips parted, revealing teeth that seemed too long, too irregular. I stumbled backward, pressing against the shelves. He raised an arm, pointing at me with an elongated finger. In that fleeting second, the overhead flickered again, and I saw something impossible. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the fluorescent glare like an animal's at night. He let out a low sound, somewhere between a growl and a sigh. Somehow, I found my voice. "Stay back," I shouted, lifting the tire iron. My arms shook so badly it was more like a tremor than a threat. The stranger tilted his head. Then, with a jerk, he lunged. I swung blindly. The tire iron collided with a meaty thunk. He barely flinched. Instead, I heard a guttural hiss. In the strobing light, I glimpsed his mouth twisted into something not quite human. I did the only thing I could. I turned and ran for the back stockroom, hoping to find a second exit. The wind from the open door howled behind me, and I felt more than heard him following. My mind screamed, "He's not normal, not human." I slammed into the stockroom, heart pounding. The overhead bulb glowed weakly, the single window rattling in the wind. I realized, with horror, that the back exit was a steel door locked from the outside. My boss insisted we keep it that way to prevent theft. Footsteps approached from the store's main area. Slow, deliberate. The man, or the thing, was coming. I braced the door with a crate, sweat chilling on my skin. Outside, the wind shrieked, sounding almost like laughter. Then came the knock. A single, hollow rap on the door. It repeated 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. My throat was so tight I could barely breathe. I raised the tire iron again, tears threatening to spill over. Silence. Then the doorknob turned, rattling uselessly against the crate. The overhead bulb flickered, strobing the stockroom in bursts of bright and dark. My reflection in a cracked mirror behind me looked pale, eyes wild. Suddenly, a voice hissed through the door, like multiple pitches speaking at once. "You have something, you shouldn't." The words made no sense. I'd carried nothing from the bag, never touched it beyond that quick glance. My mind reeled. Unless it thinks I saw too much. Or maybe the station itself was their territory. My pulse hammered. I pushed back against the crate, determined not to let him in. But the handle rattled again, stronger this time. The entire door vibrated. Then it stopped. A different sound trickled in, footsteps leaving, plus a scrape of something dragged across the floor. Was it giving up? "Go away," I whispered, breath hitching. More silence. Then the overhead light flared bright, so intense it hurt my eyes. With a pop, it died, plunging me into darkness. I froze, disoriented. A moment later, the neon outside cast faint pink light through the dusty window. I risked edging toward the door, ear pressed to the wood. No sound. Maybe he'd left. Slowly, quietly, I slid the crate aside. My hands trembled. I cracked the door an inch, peering through. The store was empty, aisles lit by the sporadic flicker of the sign. Plastic wrappers rustled in the breeze from the front door, which still stood ajar. Snow drifted inside, forming a small pile. I crept forward, scanning for any sign of him. Nothing behind the counter, nothing near the coffee machine. My heart pounded so loud I worried it would draw him. If I could just get to my truck, I might escape. I stepped over scattered candy bars, shards of knocked-over merchandise. The front door beckoned a mere 10 feet away. I swallowed, took another step. The neon sign popped overhead. My eyes darted to the corner by the fridge, empty. Another step. 5 feet left. Then, from behind the fridge, he appeared. A flicker of movement. He leapt with inhuman speed, crossing the distance in a heartbeat, slamming into me. I tumbled backward, smashing into a rack of potato chips. Pain flared in my shoulder. His face loomed above me, twisted in a feral grin, mouth parted to reveal too many teeth. The stench of rotting meat assaulted me. I screamed, flailing with the tire iron. This time, I caught him in the chest. He staggered, letting out a hiss, rancid breath washing over me. Adrenaline surged. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the throbbing in my shoulder. He lunged again, but I managed to slip sideways. The neon sign flickered manically, painting the scene in pink and black. I swung the tire iron like a bat, connecting with his side. He snarled, stumbling into a display of car accessories. Now or never. I sprinted out the front door, skidding on the icy concrete. The wind nearly knocked me over, howling across the desert. My truck was just a few yards away. The stranger roared behind me, a guttural cry that no human throat should make. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, chest tight with terror. Somehow, I got the driver's door open. I hurled myself in, slammed it shut, hit the lock. The man crashed into the window, leaving a smear of blood or slime, I couldn't tell which. He pounded on the glass, cracks forming. I jammed the key into the ignition, turned it. The engine coughed, then roared to life. He bared his teeth at me through the fractured glass, eyes blazing. The windshield wipers squeaked across a thin layer of snow. I stomped the gas. The truck lurched forward, throwing him off. He landed on the asphalt with a thud, then sprang to his feet, arms flailing. I swung the wheel, fishtailing, hard in my throat. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed him standing in the station's weak glow, silhouette contorting. Then he let out a shriek that cut through the wind, and I saw his limbs elongate, face distorting into something monstrous. Even from a distance, I sensed his fury. I didn't look again. I floored it onto Route 66, the wind buffeting my truck. My hands shook uncontrollably. The headlights sliced through swirling snow. Past the station sign, past the broken roads. I kept driving, pressing the pedal to the floor, half expecting him to appear in the rearview again. Finally, after miles of bleak desert, the adrenaline ebbed enough for me to realize tears were streaming down my cheeks. I felt the engine's hum, the squeal of wind, the pounding of my heart. I'd escaped, but only barely. By dawn, I reached a small diner attached to a motel. I parked crookedly, stumbling into the diner. The hostess gave me a startled look, seeing my ashen face and torn jacket. "You okay, honey?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Eventually, I managed to call the police from the diner's phone. But by the time they arrived at the station later that day, there was no sign of the intruder. The store was ransacked, the footprints outside half blown away by the desert wind. The security cameras were destroyed, a few wires yanked from the system. The only clue was a smear of dark fluid near the front door, likely blood, but not matching any normal sample in their database. Jerry offered me medical leave, but I quit on the spot. No job was worth another night alone in that haunted outpost. Some travelers later reported seeing a battered pickup on the highway, but no one ever found it. The rumor mill spun, some folks claiming it was a demon, or a wendigo, or just a drug-crazed drifter who left behind a bloody bag. All I know is I'll never forget that night, the flickering neon sign, the howling wind, the unnatural face looming inches from mine. Even in my nightmares, I see him leaning over the counter, empty eyes shining, offering that glistening bag as if it were some hideous gift. And I still wake, heart pounding, convinced that somewhere on Route 66, that creature roams the desert, waiting for another unlucky soul to man the station after midnight. So if you're ever traveling that lonely highway in the dead of winter, do yourself a favor, keep driving when you see the battered gas station sign. Don't stop, no matter how low your tank is. Because if you do, you might just meet that stranger, and next time, he may not let you go.